For 3,000 years, the button existed without its buttonhole. It was an ornament, a symbol of power, a tiny work of art. But it fastened absolutely nothing. The oldest known button is around 5,000 years old. It was found in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, an ancient city in the Indus Valley, in what is now Pakistan. It was made from a curved seashell, and it measured roughly 2 centimeters across. But it had no buttonhole. Nobody back then had thought of one. The button was simply sewn onto cloth as decoration. Nothing more. A pretty shell on your robe told the whole world a single thing. I am someone important. In the Indus Valley, archaeologists found buttons from the Kot Diji phase, dated between 2,800 and 2,600 years before the Common Era. They were carved with geometric patterns end pierced through, so they could be stitched onto clothing. Buttons also turned up in what is now Russia, in the catacomb culture, around 2,500 years before the Common Era. They've been found in Scottish tombs and at Bronze Age sites in China. Everywhere, they played the same role. They decorated. They did not fasten. The ancient Romans used button-like pieces too, but their clothing was held together with pins and ornamental clasps called fibulae. A toga didn't need a button. It needed nimble fingers, a little patience, and ideally someone to help you put it on. For centuries afterward in Europe, clothes were pinned with brooches, tied with laces, or simply pulled over the head. The button existed, but nobody saw any practical use for it. It was like a diamond in a ring. Beautiful, but useless in everyday life. And then, in the 13th century, someone in Germany had an idea that changed everything. But before we get there, let's see just how far the madness of the button as an ornament had gone. In the Middle Ages, buttons became an obsession of the European aristocracy. They were made of gold, of silver, of ivory, even of precious stones. Wearing richly decorated buttons was a mark of social rank, and such an obvious one that the authorities had to step in. In many countries, laws were passed to control who could wear buttons made of what. These so-called sumptuary laws forbade common people from wearing buttons of gold or precious stones. The button, which today costs pennies, was once a privilege of the elite. The peak of the madness came in the year 1520. Francis I, King of France, was setting off to meet Henry VIII at a gathering known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold. On his robe, someone counted more than 13,000 gold buttons. 13,000 on a single outfit. And it's at exactly this moment that the story of the button takes an unexpected turn. Because someone finally invented the buttonhole. The buttonhole, a reinforced slit in the fabric through which the button is pushed, appeared in 13th century Germany. This simple invention transformed a button from an ornament into a fastening, and it turned European fashion completely upside down. Suddenly, clothes could hug the body. Instead of loose robes thrown over the head, tailors began cutting fitted tunics, doublets, and gowns. The button and its hole let you shape a silhouette, and that is how fashion, in the modern sense of the word, was born. Button makers' guilds appeared as early as the 13th century. The craft was so profitable and so prestigious that master button makers enjoyed a special status in medieval towns. The very existence of a separate guild tells you just how important the button had become. Over the centuries, buttons were made of ever stranger materials: bone, horn, wood, porcelain, glass, metal, even papier-mâché. In the 18th century, buttons set with. Tiny painted portraits under little glass domes were all de rage. The button had become a canvas for artists. The Industrial Revolution democratized the button. Mass production meant it stopped being a luxury and became something anyone could afford, first as metal buttons for uniforms, then as plastic ones for everyday shirts. And then came Bakelite. Invented in 1907, this early plastic gave the button a whole new life, because it was cheap, it was durable, and it could be molded into absolutely any shape you wanted. But in 1937, the button gained a serious rival. The zipper won what became known as the Battle of the Fly, when French fashion designers went wild for zippers in men's trousers. Many predicted the button's days were numbered. The button survived, and it did rather well. The zipper is faster, true, but the button is simpler, cheaper, and easier to repair. And above all, it never jams at the worst possible moment. To this day, it remains the default fastening for shirts, jackets, and coats all over the world. There's one more secret the button has kept for centuries. If you've ever tried to button up someone else's shirt, you may have noticed something odd. On men's shirts, the buttons sit on the right. On women's, they sit on the left. Historians aren't entirely sure why, but the most popular theory says wealthy women were dressed by servants, so D-buttons were placed where it was easier for the maid. So the next time you fasten your shirt, that ordinary, everyday act you perform without a second thought, remember that this little disc is 5,000 years old. That for most of its history it fastened nothing. That kings wore them by the thousand, while the poor weren't even allowed gold ones. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story of an object you keep within arm's reach. Because the button is proof that the most important inventions aren't always spectacular. Sometimes all it takes is a small hole in a piece of cloth to change the course of fashion, end the daily lives of billions of people around the world.